and distorted if you think that enacting that cause is a sacrifice. For example, let's take a simple example. I want to see a movie. And I say, well, to do that, I have to drive. I have to spend time and money on gas. I have to stand in line. What a sacrifice. That would be ridiculous to call out a sacrifice. That's the price I have to pay, including the money for the ticket, in order to see the movie. If I don't expect something for nothing, I can't take the requirements of achieving my value and say that's a sacrifice. When would it be a sacrifice? Well, for example, suppose I really don't want to see it, but I have a friend who kind of pressures me into it and says, oh, you'll make me miserable, you've got to come and see that movie. So I don't really want to, and I say, okay, I'll give up what I want just because he wants. Then that would be a sacrifice. And you'll find that friendships like that don't last when one friend pressures you actually to sacrifice. In other words, you make the concept of sacrifice meaningless if everything, in quotes, is a sacrifice. Then the term doesn't differentiate. It makes the whole content of even of religious morality meaningless. If God says, don't be selfish, sacrifice, and you come back and say, that's okay, I sacrifice every day, every minute. Whatever I do is a sacrifice. That is simply silly. You have to decide whether or not you are surrendering a value in favor of something lesser. And I say, it's possible to do it, but if you, the sheer fact that there's a price to what you value is not a sacrifice. That is the essence of what I want to say. And let's take a few callers before I go on. On line 8, John, welcome to the Leonard Peikoff Show. Hi, John, are you there?
Yes, hi.
Hi. What do you think about this whole question?
I think it's kind of it's kind of strange. You know, they interview all these people that have lived to be like 100 years old, and they ask them the question about longevity, and they say, you know, take it easy and have some sense of humor, but don't use the treadmill.
Yeah.
And
well, what does that tell you?
That tells me that we got a funny society here, and sacrifices and heroes are out of date and out of proportion.
Well, I don't equate sacrifice and hero, do you?
Well, I just believe that the life's destination is the journey. Enjoy the ride and make nice with other people.
But if you enjoy the ride, you're achieving something, you're having a happiness, where does sacrifice come into the picture?
It does not. Sacrifice is egotism.
Well, I think sacrifice is the opposite of egotism. Sacrifice is, if you were completely egotistical or egoistical or selfish, you wouldn't give up what you value. You would fight for what you value. You'd do what you had to get what you value. But if somebody then came up to you and said, well, somebody needs it more than you, or somebody around the world is suffering, so give up your value, I would say that's completely corrupt.
But that's acquired thinking, though, isn't it?
Well, all thinking is acquired thinking. I don't think we're born with, you know, an initial principle that you should sacrifice or you shouldn't. We're born blank, and it's according to what we're taught. The Greeks had no penchant, the ancient Greek, for sacrifice. It was only when Judaism and Christianity took over that this concept of sacrifice was implanted into kids from the time they're very young.
That's right.
And so long as we have that, we're going to have... Did you hear the show from the beginning today?
Yes, I did.
Do you understand my reference to why I introduced this topic through the communists and the Republicans?
Yes.
How would you connect the issue of sacrifice? Because I never did make that connection. Why do you think how are the communists connected to the issue of sacrifice?
I'm still thinking it over. I don't really have a good opinion on it, but
the communists think that the greatest sin of all is selfishness. They denounce the so-called bourgeoisie because all they want is to build up money for themselves, build up their business, the profit motive. And their whole idea is you're supposed to live to serve the group. You're supposed to sacrifice everything for society, for the group. And so, of course, when you try to introduce elements of private property and capitalism in Russia, all of these collectivists who are brought up to believe in sacrifice.
Now, can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
Is that Karl Marx, or whose idea was that?
Well, it was Jesus, and it was then Karl Marx. Karl Marx took over the essence of the Christian religion.
Yes.
The idea of sacrifice as noble. And he simply changed the recipient, where instead of you're supposed to sacrifice for God, you're supposed to sacrifice for society. So what they say in philosophy is he secularized Christianity. He took the same idea of self-sacrifice as the ideal, but he said you're supposed to sacrifice to make the group happy rather than to make God happy. So it's the same basic idea. And that's why communism always flourished in a truly religious society, and why communism was able to take over in Eastern Europe and couldn't in Western Europe, because Western Europe is more individualist, more heritage from ancient Greece, and less from Christianity and Judaism.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
Is that what's coming back today in our society?
It is what's coming back today. The Republicans are in a complete dichotomy, a complete contradiction.
Yes.
They want more capitalism, but they are absolutely, completely trapped in the ethics of altruism, service, and sacrifice.
I see.
So what they're trying to do is cut the welfare spending while screaming that they're not really doing it. And the arch example there, I mean, they're in such a hopeless position. They have a revolution. They say, we got to cut Medicare, cut Social Security, etc. And instead of standing up and saying, we're cutting these programs because we believe in a society where each man is responsible for his own well-being, where no one is to sacrifice for anyone, we're going back to the founding fathers in the pursuit of happiness, they say, we're cutting welfare, but please don't blame us, because even after our cuts, you're going to have even more money for welfare than you had before. You see what I mean? They are appeasers who accept their very ethics of the Democrats because they're all Christians or Judeo-Christians. See what I mean?
They're the Neville Chamberlains of the 1990s.
That's exactly what they are. They're appeasers, and until they change their morality, they're never going to do anything, and they're just going to be ousted from office, because if both parties accept the same idea of service and sacrifice to the needy as the standard, the Democrats are more consistent than the Republicans.
Yeah, sir, I wish you had a newspaper column.
The pardon?
I wish you had a newspaper column.
Well, maybe someday that'll happen. Thanks, John. I
Thank you very
appreciate
much.
your call. Thank you for being on the show. On line 12, Ed, welcome to the Leonard Peikoff Show.
Leonard, this is Ed.
Hi, Ed.
I'm for human sacrifice.
Okay, go ahead.
I've been married for 45 years, sacrificing all my life, and I'm looking for a volcano to throw my old hay bag into it.
I want to know, are you kidding me or are you being serious? Have you had that battle life?
I'm sorry?
Have you had that battle life?
I don't think I'd be married 45 years if that was true.
So you loved this woman?
Yeah, I think so.
Do you think love involves sacrifice?
I think it's going to work.
I want to know if you think love involves sacrifice.
You bet.
No, I say it shouldn't. I say it doesn't. I say it can't. Give me an example.
Have you ever worn
I've been
this
married.
Have you ever worn this nation's uniform?
No, I haven't.
Have you ever avoided wearing it by
No, I
leaving this
haven't.
country?
No, I haven't.
What about the people
But
in
I
Israel?
want to ask you a question about love. Can we get back to love for a minute?
Yeah.
You were married for 45 years. Give me an example of where, in your opinion, your love for your wife involved a sacrifice.
Oh, I go to work every day and bring home the paycheck.
And you do that resentfully, giving up what you really value?
Yeah, I'm a pretty selfish guy.
Well, but what is your definition of selfish? You want somebody else to support you?
That would be nice.
Is that what you want?
That would be nice.
Then you're carrying out my point that you have no sense of responsibility. You want something for nothing.
What about the people
Is
in
that
Israel?
right? Is that right? You want something for nothing?
What about the people in Israel that have sacrificed their lives to maintain the state of Israel?
I believe absolutely that if you find that your values require a certain type of society and require freedom, and you are being menaced by an enemy, if you are not a bum, if you don't believe that you get something for nothing, then you fight for your values and pay the price, and that is selfish. That is not a sacrifice.
Well,
so if it's a war you believe in, as the Israelis do,
you're
and if they hold survival in their country as preferable than to being enslaved by an Arab invader, then absolutely that's selfish. The kind of person, let me just tell you, who would be the kind of person for whom that would not be selfish? would be the kind of person who says, I don't care whether I live in liberty or as a slave, it means nothing to me. Or I want liberty, but I want something for nothing. It's not up to me to fight for what I want. In other words, a person who would say it's a sacrifice is either a slave or a bum, and I think that's a reflection against him.
You're not talking about an intellectual quality. You're just talking about an instinct. We all have self-preservation.
I don't think it's an instinct. If it was an instinct, the philosophy of sacrifice could never have caught on. Because it's in direct conflict to self-preservation.
And Ayn Rand is a fraud. She's putting out something that's pandering to people who do want to cater to themselves and the hell with everybody else.
I wish that there were that many people. What is horrifying is the idea that people think that selfishness is so common, and in fact selfishness is very rare. What is common is whim worship. That is, people who don't even bother to form value judgments. They just have casual desires of the moment, and they just want to get them satisfied without any work or without any effort. They want somebody else to look after them. That is not selfishness as Ayn Rand advocates.
Does that describe a guy who's been married 45 years?
Altogether depends. There's a lot of masochists. But hopefully you really loved your wife. But I would hate for you to come home one day, Ed, and say to her, you know, all my life, Martha, or whatever her name is, I have really wanted to be someplace else. There's other women. I'd rather have been in a bar. I'd rather have gone to the movies. But I had my duty to you, and for 45 years I've put in, you know, I've done my duty. I've done my obligation. I've been selfless. I think if your wife heard that, that would be the greatest mortal insult. The one thing that any rational, decent woman would want is that you would say to her after 45 years, well, I got such joy out of being with you. This was the most selfishly exciting 45 years I could imagine. What other compliment could a woman want but that you chose her for your pleasure, not as a boring duty rather than what you would want to do?
Well,
now I give you an idea for what to say for Mother's Day.
If I'm a selfish guy, it shouldn't matter to me whether she does or not.
No, a selfish person can love another. They can have strong values if the other person lives up to their values and promotes their personal happiness. And if not, you shouldn't have a relationship. You think it over. I got to go for a commercial. Thank you, Ed, for your call. I appreciate your call. It's 3:18. My name is Leonard Peikoff. Our topic today is sacrifice. And before we go to more callers, I want to make one last point today with regard to sacrifice. And that is there could be no dictatorship, no slave society without the idea that sacrifice is a virtue. There never was a dictatorship in all history that didn't count on sacrifice. So it's not only religions that preach sacrifice. It is any aspiring or actual dictator. Predict very simply, how would you react if you believed and you were taught to stand up for your values, to pursue your own happiness, as the American founding fathers said, to be selfish in the sense that you are responsible for your life and for getting what you want, and no one has a right to sacrifice you? What would happen to you if a dictator tried to inject himself and take over? You would protest. You would protest harm to yourself or harm to your loved ones in the name of your ideas, your convictions, your desires. But if you are taught sacrifice, if you're taught that the good is to go counter to your ideas and desires, then you're hooked. You're disarmed. You're caught. You're trapped. Sacrifice means give up what you think and what you want, and that just inculcate obedience, blind, mindless subservience. And that's just what a dictator wants. Now, who is it that said, for instance, quote, the wishes and the selfishness of the individual must appear as nothing and submit. A man must renounce putting forward his personal opinion and interest and sacrifice both. That's Adolf Hitler. How about this one? The basic idea of National Socialism is, I'm quoting from a Nazi book of slogans, sacrifice. And you'll forgive my German. Gemeinnütz geht vor Eigennutz. The common good comes before the private good. Another one. Du bist nichts, dein Volk ist alles. You are nothing.